Hey guys, it's Dr. Childs here, and we are going to talk about Hashimoto's and diet today, okay? And specifically what I'm going to be doing is talking about all of the diets that exist that actually help or may help reduce the antibodies and help you lose weight if you have Hashimoto's disease. Okay, so as a primer, this is me. I'm right up here. This is my blog. I'm Dr. Childs, and this blog post is specifically about the best Hashimoto's diet, and you'll soon find that there isn't a quote-unquote best diet, but there may be a best one for you, and so that's exactly what we're going to go over. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down all the way over here, and as you can see, this blog post has I'm grateful that it has over 2,000 shares, so it's been pretty popular with patients, and it has a lot of helpful information, and I want to just put it into words so that I can help you guys as much as possible. So when we talk about diet, especially in the setting of Hashimoto's, there's a lot of confusion out on the internet, especially when patients start talking to other patients, because they'll say, hey, I did this diet and it really helped, or I did that diet and it really helped, and so you're thinking, oh, well, I need to do this diet or I need to do that, and it doesn't really work that way. Every single person is unique, every single person is different, and each one of you has different medical conditions, all right, and you need to tailor your diet to the specific conditions that you have, okay? And so there's a list of several diets that can help patients with Hashimoto's, and what you need to figure out is which one is going to work best for you. And so that's exactly what this blog post goes or talks about, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So I have this big picture that's really helpful to look at. It's 5 diets that help reduce antibodies in Hashimoto's. All of these diets are ones that I have used in my clinic with success, and so they're all ones that I have treated patients with, and I know that they work, some better than others, but that's what we're going to talk about. So number 1, we're going to go into detail about the Elimination Diet, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry. We'll talk about it, and we'll talk about who should consider using it. Number 2 is the Autoimmune Paleo Protocol, otherwise known as the AIP Diet. Again, I'll talk about who should do that. The third one we're going to be discussing today is going to be the Gluten-Free Diet, and I'm sure you guys have heard about that one. The fourth one will be the Paleo Diet, which is different than the Autoimmune Protocol or AIP Diet. And then the fifth one is going to be the low FODMAP Diet. And many of you may not have heard of this one, and so that's why I'm going to spend a little more time explaining how this could be helpful for you. And then also, I probably won't talk about this too much throughout this video, but it is worth noting that there are diets that make Hashimoto's worse, so you should avoid these at all costs, okay? And number 1 of these, the 3 that I list, there are some other ones, but number 1 would be the low-fat diets, any and all low-fat diets, because that necessarily means high-carbohydrate diet or high-sugar diet, so you want to avoid those. Number 2 is the very low carbohydrate diet or nutritional ketosis, so that would be just diets that completely eliminate all carbohydrates, and we'll talk about why that is. And then any and all low-calorie diet, so you do not want to ever be on less than 1,200 to 1,400 calories per day if you have thyroid disease of any kind, because that is going to result in more thyroid damage to your body, and you're going to feel like crap. Okay, so you want to avoid those diets at all costs. But let's jump into the first of the 5 diets that I wanted to discuss today, and that one is, it has several names, but I call it here the food sensitivity diet. You might know it as the Elimination Diet. And what it is basically is a diet that attempts to remove any foods that may be causing inflammation in your body or foods that you might be sensitive to. And I want to talk about the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity here, because a true allergy to food would be something like shellfish, in which you might react with swelling in your mouth and lips and things like that, versus a sensitivity, which may just kind of make you feel a little run down. Could get a runny nose, may get abdominal pain, gas, bloating, things like that. But those are 2 very different things, okay? And it's possible to have a lot of food sensitivities, and someone may say, well, you've got food allergies, but that's not entirely true, because you can a lot of the times reverse those sensitivities if you pull out certain foods. And so there's a couple ways you can do that. You can do the blood testing for food sensitivities, and that's done by doing this test called a delayed IgG food sensitivity testing. This is better than the skin prick test or other testing that you might get. It's a delayed IgG, and this is Dr. Amy Myers here. She has a little video explaining the difference between or why you would want this test over other tests. I'm not going to go over that today, but feel free to get on this and watch. I think it's only a couple minutes. The other way to do it, so you have the first option would be let's order your blood, we'll check the IgG antibodies in your blood and let's see which ones you react to and kind of go from there. The second way to do it, and this is kind of the way that I tend to prefer patients start out with, depending on how bad their symptoms are, but would just be to eliminate foods systematically. And so you can see a list of foods that I put here that are the most common allergens in certain patients, or foods that are likely to cause sensitivity. So dairy products, wheat products, corn products, peanuts, tomatoes, shellfish, citrus fruits, juices, sugar, chocolate. I mean, you could read the whole list here. But these are the ones that a lot of people react to. And it's not that you have a true allergy to these foods, but what can happen is if you have inflammation in the gut, if you have certain sensitivities to begin with, you're more likely to develop other sensitivities which aren't true. So let me give you a perfect example of what happens in a lot of patients that I see. They come in to see me. They've recently been diagnosed with Hashimoto's. They feel like they're reacting to everything. Lots of joint pain, inflammation, postnasal drip, runny nose, chronic pain, things like that. And I'll test their blood and I'll find out they have celiac disease and they never knew, or they really do have a gluten. They have like elevated antibodies to gluten, and so I'll tell them to remove antibodies, or to remove gluten from their diet. And what you'll find is suddenly when they've removed gluten from their diet, they can then start to tolerate some of these other foods, whereas before they weren't able to. So that's a case where inflammation in the gut can predispose you to developing sensitivities, but they're not true allergies. Okay, I'm going to get into why I think you should eliminate gluten, dairy, and soy no matter what if you have Hashimoto's. That should kind of be the first step, but this is a more advanced diet to consider. You can kind of see here I've given you some resources that you can just click on and look at, so you can take away all of the foods that are there, and then you can slowly and systematically reintroduce those foods after you've allowed the inflammation to cool off, the gut to heal. You can reintroduce these foods, and most of the time you'll be able to tolerate it when you do the reintroduction. Does it work? Yes, it works quite well. I was having a discussion with a colleague of mine, and one of the go-to ways that, or one of the best ways that we found to treat patients is to do something like this. You do gluten, dairy, soy-free, and then you do the elimination testing to remove anything that has like a +3 or +4 sensitivity to it on it, and the combination of those things seems to be very, very powerful. Just doing the elimination diet by itself can help a lot of people, though. I don't want to discount that. So yes, it works. Not for everybody, but yes, it definitely does work. And I want to point out that you don't necessarily have to get that delayed IgG food sensitivity testing. It is very helpful if you do get it, but you don't absolutely have to do it. And so I bring that up because you may need a doctor to order that test, but there's nothing stopping you from right now just going to my website, going up here, clicking on this list of foods, and then eliminating them right now. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. And if your symptoms match, you can easily do that. So what I've done is I've given the pros and cons here. I'm not going to go over that right now because you can read them yourself. But pretty much everything you would need is right here in front of you. Who should consider going on the elimination diet? So I've put here patients or people that react with itching, swelling, hives, runny nose, postnasal drip, especially after eating certain foods. So that would be one reason to do it. People who have a personal history of asthma or eczema, that seem to go together. Okay, so these are people that are kind of a little twitchy and just very, very sensitive to foods and allergens. And then, of course, people who have failed the more basic diets, like if you just wanted to do gluten-free for some reason and it wasn't working, or soy-free or grain-free. I mean, patients do kind of whatever. If they heard a friend did it and it works, they're willing to try anything. So, if you failed one of those diets before, it's not worth, you probably need to amp up your dedication and go a little bit more intense in terms of your dietary changes. So anyone with these matching these symptoms should consider that, but you can also get that testing and everything if you want to get going that way, or you feel more comfortable doing it that way. So that's number one, the elimination diet. Number two is the autoimmune paleo diet, or the AIP diet. Okay, and this is basically a much stricter version of the paleo diet to begin with. So if you just, to put it in to simplify it, just take the paleo diet, but then exclude nuts, seeds, eggs, legumes, and nightshades, and now you pretty much have the AIP diet. So you can see it's pretty restrictive, and it's not my favorite diet. If you start going around out on the internet, you'll find that some people will say it's AIP or bust. I don't agree with that completely. I don't think it's a diet that everyone should be on. Certain patients I put them on, and you're going to say, well, what about that patient you did a case study on that lost 30 pounds on it? Yeah, I know. I mean, again, it depends on you and it depends on your body. But some people have success with it and other people don't. It really just depends. So what I've done here is I've put a whole list of all of the foods that are allowed. You can kind of go through this. I've got some cheat sheets for you on foods to include and foods to avoid, because it can get a little nuanced and a little difficult to kind of sort through. So these resources will help you figure that out. So you don't have so your questions will be minimal. Does it work? Yes, it definitely works. The only issue I see is that some people have difficulty with the reintroduction of foods afterwards. They seem to develop oral tolerance, and so that can be an issue for many people. Because of that, I don't routinely recommend it to every patient, but the patients who should consider using it are those who have multiple autoimmune conditions. So if someone comes in to see me and they have Hashimoto's and type 1 diabetes and thrombocytopenia or ITP or idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, something like that, multiple autoimmune diseases, I'll say, okay, this is somebody that probably has, very reactive to multiple foods. They're somebody that needs to be on a pretty strict, intense diet. So someone like that, I would consider it in. Definitely somebody who has failed all the other less restrictive diets. So if you did the Elimination Diet without success, if you did the gluten-free or Paleo or whatever it is, and you failed those ones, or meaning you didn't have the results that you were looking for in terms of antibody reduction or weight loss, then this would be something to consider as well. And there are some people who want to do the most intense version of everything, okay? And there's some of you out there are like that, and that's perfectly fine. You're going to say, well, whatever it is, I want to do the best one. Okay, I don't want to put into that category, but it definitely is one of the more intense diets to do. Some people consider it the best in terms of the most restrictive, so you could jump into it if that was sort of your personality. Okay. Number 3, gluten-free diet. Pretty sure most of you guys know what it is. I'm not going to talk specifically what it is about gluten. It's a protein, basically gliadin, and gluten are parts of certain foods that can be very reactive to people or to patients with a certain sensitivity. So I'm not going to get into that, but I do want to point out that there are 2 specific syndromes here that are worth mentioning. Okay, the first is celiac disease. Okay, and then the second is non-celiac gluten sensitivity, otherwise known as in the literature NCGS. Okay, celiac disease is a true autoimmune disease, meaning if you come into contact with gluten or gliadin or its particles, your body will mount an immune response to that component or to that piece of protein, and it will result in inflammation, it will result in damage, you'll get systemic symptoms, it causes a lot of issues. Okay, and so it's celiac disease, but I want to point out, is an autoimmune disease, and that should be differentiated from NCGS or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is just a sensitivity to the gluten particle. Both are real, though. There's data to prove that both exist. So people that just go gluten-free for, air quotes here because it's a fad diet and they get better, that's probably because they had NCGS, not just because it's in their head or whatever. And so there are two separate entities here, but both will improve by removing gluten. I have some more cheat sheets for you to give you an idea of where gluten is, and run from it and yum, eat it, I guess. So does it work? Yeah. I'm going to take a minute and say that if you have Hashimoto's and you haven't gone gluten-free, you pretty much you should definitely consider that. Okay, it's very immunogenic. In fact, a lot of patients with Hashimoto's have high crossover rates to developing celiac disease. Even if they don't have it now, they may certainly develop at a later time in their life. You can get some more info and some pros and cons on this. So who should consider it? I recommend you going gluten-free if you have Hashimoto's for at least 3 months. That's kind of what I'd consider the standard. I also recommend it if you have a family history of celiac disease, Hashimoto's, or other thyroid problems. And most thyroid patients know this because they've asked around in their family, but if you go back in line, you're like, well, my mom's on thyroid disease, my aunt is, my sister is, but that's what I'm talking about. That family history probably means you guys are just more susceptible to developing Hashimoto's or autoimmune diseases in general. Cut out the gluten. That's would be your first step. And then I've also found great success in having people with chronic migraines, cluster headaches, chronic headaches, issues with acne or multiple GI symptoms like irritable bowel or IBD, who go gluten-free get almost immediate improvement over the course of several weeks or so. So those are the patients I would consider doing this. If you're going to do this, though, this is my little quick tip here, you need to do it 100%. It's not like you can just try to go gluten-free for a little bit or be 95% gluten-free. If you're going to do it, give it 100% and do it the right way. Okay, so there's definitely a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. So you don't just want to go to the grocery store and start buying gluten-free breads and pastas and things like that and eating the same food you did. That's not really going to be helpful. But that's not a conversation we're going to have today. But there are tons of resources to get you started on that, okay? Number 4 is the Paleo diet. Most of you, I think, are pretty familiar with the Paleo diet. That's probably one of my favorites to get people started on initially, just because it makes a lot of sense. You start with real whole foods. There's a list of foods that you can eat over here and the ones to avoid. I use some of these images to kind of to make that point more obvious, but you can read through those if you want. I'm not going to go over that one too much. Does it work? Absolutely. Paleo can help a lot of patients. There are a lot of people that have blogs dedicated to Paleo by itself, showing that it works quite well. You can see the pros and cons here. And then I have who should consider it. I would say typically what I'll do is if a patient comes in and they're not really willing to make changes, or they're not, they haven't been quite convinced that the diet has a big impact on Hashimoto's. If they've already failed like gluten-free, I'll say, okay, now you gave it a shot. Let's amp it up a little bit. But also people that have symptoms like these. So acne is another big one. Depression, anxiety, or other psychiatric issues. Lots of fatigue or eczema. Allergies, either environmental or seasonal. Postnasal drip, which is just chronic runny nose or stuffy nose, GI symptoms like IBS or IBD, acid reflux, and then chronic constipation. And then if you're reading this and you're like, this information is too complex, you're like, I don't even know where to start. I'm brand new. I just found out I have Hashimoto's, and now you're telling me all these things. What are you talking about? Okay, if you don't know anything else, start here. Paleo is pretty easy, right? There's tons of information out on the internet. You can just Google how to start paleo. I never actually tried that, but I'm positive that you can find all the information you need just by doing that. Okay, so it's a good first place to start. Then the last one I want to talk about is the low FODMAP diet. So you're probably gonna, I don't know how many people have heard about it here, but you'll probably say, well, what the heck is low FODMAPs? What is that? Well, it's an acronym, okay, and it stands for fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. All right, and so basically what these are, it's a class of sugars and carbohydrates that are highly fermentable to bacteria in the gut and to certain species of yeast. And so that can lead to a lot of symptoms of things like gas and bloating, and patients who have the so-called candida or yeast overgrowth usually also have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, and this is one of the diets to consider in treating that. And you'll say, well, how can this low FODMAP diet impact Hashimoto's? Well, it's a great question. Most of these conditions, like yeast overgrowth and SIBO, are inflammatory conditions that lead to local inflammation in the GI tract, chronic constipation, changes in the intestinal microbiota, which can then lead to increased permeability at the intestinal wall. And that is all a fancy name for describing what you guys definitely know as leaky gut. Okay, so I don't like that term because it's very nonspecific, but essentially what this diet does is it targets the overgrowth and changes of bacteria that occur in the GI tract as a result of these things. And this is so important for patients who have Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, because thyroid hormone helps activate the GI tract and move food through the intestines. And that sort of natural movement of the GI tract constantly is known as peristalsis. And it's just a rhythmic, slow motion of your intestines all the time. And if you have low thyroid in your blood, that slows down. So even if it slows down by 75, 80, well, not that much, maybe 20, 25% or so, that allows for stool and food to stay in your GI tract longer, which means that the bacteria and the yeast can eat more of it, cause more fermentation, cause more byproducts, and lead to symptoms. Okay, so that's why treating SIBO can be so difficult, and that's why you have to do the diet. But in addition, you have to make sure you're treating with adequate amounts of thyroid hormone. So I have a list here, so you can look at the shopping list of vegetables, fruits, dairy, etc. Does it work? Yeah, it definitely works, but not for everybody. I mean, this is one of those diets that's a little bit nuanced. I wouldn't just say if you're recently diagnosed and you don't know where to start. This is probably not the one to start with. This requires a little bit of knowledge in terms of your GI tract. This is probably for more seasoned people who have tried paleo and other things and didn't do real well. So who should consider it? I have patients here that I've listed would be patients who have a history of SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or Candida yeast overgrowth. Either they have been diagnosed or they have all the symptoms. Classic signs of these syndromes would be somebody who has gas and bloating despite a change in their diet, and especially if that gas and bloating is 30 to 60 minutes after they've eaten, or just all the time. But those specifically are the symptoms to look out for. And then, of course, people who have failed less restrictive diets, that you're kind of getting the trend here. If you've tried a diet that's not as restrictive, you failed it, well, guess what? It's time to move up. It's time to move up to the more intense ones. I'm not going to go over the soy-free and wheat-free diets, but just know that they are helpful. I did tell you before of the diets that you would want to avoid. Low fat is definitely one. Do not adopt the general guidelines. Low fat necessarily means high carbohydrates, and that's definitely not something you want to do. It's going to increase your insulin and make things worse. I did include the diets you should avoid. Of number 2 would be the very low carbohydrate diet, or nutritional ketosis. And it's not that people can't do well on these diets. It's that a lot of patients who are in the conventional model, they're being undertreated with their thyroid, usually, not always, usually. And in addition to that, they also have issues with adrenal fatigue. So if you take a patient like that and you restrict their carbohydrates significantly, they're going to feel worse. Okay, even though they might lower inflammation, they might even lose a couple pounds, it's going to put an increased demand on the adrenal system and thus the thyroid system, and you'll feel a little bit crummier. So I don't typically recommend that unless you're being monitored by a physician, or you're pretty advanced, you have a lot of research under your belt, and you've done a lot of reading on this stuff. And then this one, number 3 in terms of diets you should avoid, this would be any and all low-calorie diets. You should not be eating, I put this little picture of the plate here with lettuce leaves, I think, on that. But you cannot do diets like this, and it's so tempting for a lot of you because you'll say, well, Dr. Childs, if I eat more than 1,400, 1,500 calories, I'm going to gain weight. I understand, and that could be the case, but the solution to that is not to completely restrict your calories constantly to further damage your metabolism. So do not do these diets. You are going to have to slowly heal your metabolism, and we're not going to talk about that because it's a whole other subject, but you have to heal your metabolism and slowly increase your diet, otherwise you will constantly damage your thyroid, okay? And that's pretty much it. You can read through some of these other things in this blog post. It's very long, very detailed. And I go over a lot of the same techniques I use in my patients, and I want to just give this information to you guys so you can get started. I know it can be daunting if you've just been recently diagnosed, but there are a lot of things that are within your power that you could change, okay? So my goal for you would be to read this and say, oh my gosh, I fit into, whatever, the low FODMAP side. I've never even heard of that, so what is that? Let me try it. So something like that, that's what I've intended this to be for. But I have to say also, diet by itself is not the only thing to consider. Diet is just one piece of this overall puzzle. So most of my patients, diet I change their diet immediately upon coming in, but this is one of 8 or 9 therapies that I'm doing kind of simultaneously. So, but I do want to focus on this just for this video because it's something you have power over, okay? So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below, or go to my website and leave them on this blog post if you'd like. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can get more videos and audio and podcasts like this. So if you enjoyed it, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.